Last time when we talked about the most important lessons I learned from leadership, I talked about the first one, which is encounter. It all begins with your personal encounter with God. So if you haven't watched that, go back and see that one. Your leadership begins by following Jesus. And then the second thing after your personal encounter with God is your calling. You know, whenever Moses was at the burning bush, God came to him and they had an encounter, they interacted, but then God gave him an assignment and said, Moses, I've selected you to be a leader. I like to call Moses the reluctant leader. So many people in the Bible didn't want to be leaders. You know, God would come to Deborah and Deborah would say, but I'm a woman. God would go to Gideon and Gideon would say, but I'm not famous. God went to Jeremiah and Jeremiah said, yeah, but I'm too young. And Moses said, I can't speak, which is interesting. In the New Testament, it says Moses was trained in all the ways of the Egyptians. And so Moses had great training, but he lacked confidence and he wasn't, thinking that he was able to do what God called him to do. And so he was the reluctant leader. God came to him and said, Moses, it starts this way. It's actually Exodus 3 and 4. You might want to look that up. He says, Moses, I've been listening to my people. I'm hearing their cry. They're slaves down in Egypt, and I'm listening to them. I love the phraseology here in Exodus 3:23. It says, during that long period, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites groaned in their slavery and cried out, and their cry for help because of their slavery went up to God. God heard their groaning, and he remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. So God looked on the Israelites and was concerned about them. So that's the motivating factor. You're not making this up. You're simply a delegated leader acting for God. You're not just trying to make up your own deal. You're actually doing the calling that God has for you. After you have a personal encounter, then you have to say, okay, Lord, what do you want to do? What's the reason you created me? What's my purpose here? What's the calling? For Moses, it was to go down and get the Israelites and lead them out of slavery. For you, it might be to start a group, a small group, a micro church. Who knows what it is? Maybe it's in secular leadership. You're supposed to be a supervisor. Whatever your leadership call is, it's a calling from God. Don't try to make it up, and don't try to just train something on the outside. Make sure you pull from the inside and say, what is the gift? What is the purpose? What is the calling? So I love this story. God says, I've seen the misery of my people. I've heard them crying out, and I'm concerned about their suffering. So I've come down to rescue them. Moses was probably saying, great, this is good news. But God said, Moses, I am sending you. I am concerned for my people, so you are my extension to those people. I am sending you. Your calling is to represent me. That's always your calling in whatever capacity, to represent God. Your calling is to represent me. So I am sending you to Pharaoh. And I love the interaction between Moses and God. I love that Moses sometimes seems like a Jewish merchant negotiating with God. I actually love that. I love that perspective. Abraham sometimes seems the same way. But Moses says, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? Why did you select me? Everybody says that. I'm too young. I'm too old. I'm a woman. I'm disqualified for some reason or another. And Moses honestly said, who am I that I should go? Why would you come out here in the desert where I'm a shepherd and ask me to do something like that? Actually, if Moses would have said, yeah, I'm your guy, I'm just perfectly called and suited for that, that probably would have been an alarm bell. But Moses was humble enough to say, I don't think I can do this. Who am I? And God didn't tell Moses who he was. Instead, God told Moses who God was. He didn't say, Moses, I looked at your resume and I'm pretty sure you're qualified. He simply said, I am who I am. I'm going with you. When you go down there, you're not going to be alone. I'm going to be with you. Moses said, who am I? God said, doesn't matter. Who am I? I am who I am. I'm going to help you. I'm going to be with you. And then Moses said, so what if they don't believe me? Actually, let me back up because I skipped one. The next question after that was, he said, okay, you're going to go with me. But the second question is, then who are you? And that's when God said, I'm Almighty God. I am who I am. I'm the answer for everything you need. Who am I? Doesn't matter. I'm going with you. So who are you? I am that I am. Then he said, what if they do not believe me or listen to me and say, the Lord did not appear to you? Then he said, what's in your hand? I love that because he didn't say, well, I need to send you off to get a couple of degrees first. He said, what have you got? What's in your hand? The miracle is in your hand. In Moses' case, it was a rod. And he said, throw it down, and it became a snake, and then he picked it up. And it was supernatural. It was the supernatural of God. It was the addition of God's power into Moses' life. And so in some form, you need that. And the good news is you have that. He's given gifts to every one of us as it pleased him. So that might be the supernatural ability to interpret a situation. That might be a gift of the Spirit, as listed in 1 Corinthians 12. That might be so many things. What is it you're called to do? I was telling the staff the other day, I was going off to Bible school. I'd never preached, and I didn't want to be a preacher per se. And so I actually was asked by the pastor of the church I was in to preach. And I did preach. I studied and I preached. And about 10 minutes into the message, I realized I had a gift. I realized what was in my hand. And so it's very important when you're discovering your calling, when you're making your calling and your election sure, that you discover what gifts you have. You know, ask other people, where do I do well? What am I good at? You know, if you love to sing and you sound horrible, it's probably not your gift. But if you look at Romans 12, it talks about, you know, the different levels of God's will in relationship to discovering the gifts God has put in you. What can you do? What gift do you have? So he said, what's in your hand? What do you have? If you'll give God whatever you have, he'll use it because he's the one that put it there, and it is sufficient for your calling. God would not ask you to do something that he did not equip you to do. And so he says, what's in your hand? I want to be with you. Then Moses said, oh Lord, I have never been eloquent. There's a good reason why I'm disqualified. Don't we all have that? I'm not famous. You know, I have no money. There's all these reasons why I can't do what you've asked me to do. I'm not eloquent, neither in the past. And by the way, since you and I had this conversation, it's not getting any better right now. And Moses said, go, I will help you speak and teach you what to say. He said, I'm going to be with you. I'm going to help you. I'm going to do this through you, Moses. And Moses said, Lord, please send somebody else. And interestingly, God got angry at Moses. And Moses wasn't getting it. So God said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll send your brother Aaron. He's coming out to meet you, and he can be your mouthpiece. He can be your prophet. Well, it didn't take long when Aaron was speaking for Moses, who was speaking for God, for Moses to take over and begin to let what was in him come out. But if you can relate this story to your life, you know, what are the questions you want to ask God? Who am I? Why me? You know, what's going to happen when I go and people think it's just me making this up? And all these different questions we have, those are legitimate questions, but get your answers from God. And look at Moses, the reluctant prophet, the reluctant deliverer, and say, God, if you go with me and I do what it looks like you're calling me to do, can I count on you to be with me? And the answer is yes. Will there be supernatural equipment to help me? Giftings beyond my intellect. But if we had to depend on our intellect, we'd all be in big trouble. Are there going to be supernatural helps? And what's going to happen when I go? And here's my weakness. Can you turn my weakness into a strength? The good news is, after you have an encounter with God, he has a specific purpose and calling for your life. Discover that. And as the New Testament says, make your calling and your election sure.